Hello and welcome to our channel. Tonight, we embark on a journey that is not bound by a specific place or a single definable event. Instead, we are setting out on the trail of a man, a ghost who strode with perfect composure and unnerving confidence through the glittering gossamer world of 18th century European high society. But this was no ordinary man. He was a phantom who seemed to appear from nowhere and belonged to no one. A living paradox who defied every category the age of reason sought to impose upon the world. He was a polymath of such dazzling and bewildering talents that he seemed more like a collection of brilliant men than a single individual. He was a virtuoso musician who could improvise a concerto on the violin or harpsichord with a skill that was said to rival the great masters of the day. He was a gifted painter who created canvases of startling beauty, using unique, brilliant pigments of his own invention that seemed to give his work an inner, living luminescence. He was a brilliant linguist who spoke a dozen languages: French, German, English, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and more with such flawless, native-like fluency that no one, not even the most astute courtiers, could ever guess his country of birth. And he was a chemical genius, a modern Vulcan, who seemed to hold the deepest, most coveted secrets of alchemy in the palm of his hand, casually demonstrating feats that bordered on the miraculous. But all of these incredible documented accomplishments pale in comparison to the central, defining, and reality-bending mystery of his life. For this man, by all credible contemporary accounts, did not seem to age. For nearly half a century, as he moved like a phantom through the highest circles of society, from the court of Louis XV in France to Catherine the Great in Russia, his physical appearance remained utterly, uncannily unchanged, frozen in time as a handsome, vigorous man of about 45. He himself hinted at a far greater, more profound secret, casually dropping remarks in conversation that suggested he was not merely ageless, but truly ancient. He would speak of private conversations with Jesus Christ, of offering friendly advice to Alexander the Great, and of witnessing pivotal events from centuries past, not as a student of history but as an eyewitness. This is the story of the man they called the Count of Saint Germain. Was he, as his most ardent followers came to believe, a true immortal, an ascended master who had unlocked the secrets of eternal life through the spiritual and physical discipline of alchemy? Was he, as others have speculated, a time traveler, a visitor from another age, observing and perhaps gently guiding the course of human events? Or was he, as the hardened skeptics insist, the most accomplished, the most audacious, and the most enigmatic charlatan in human history, a master of illusion and self-invention who played the royalty and intelligentsia of Europe for fools on a continental scale? Tonight, we will attempt to unravel the tightly wound mystery of this ultimate historical enigma. We will trace his documented path with forensic detail, from the gossipy salons of Paris to the cold corridors of power in St. Petersburg, from the battlefields of Germany to the esoteric laboratories of a Danish prince. We will examine his incredible skills, his supposed miracles, and his mysterious world-altering claims. We will sift through the primary sources, the letters, the diaries, and the memoirs of the famous people who knew him, from the cynical philosopher Voltaire and the powerful royal mistress Madame de Pompadour to the libertine adventurer Casanova. And we will explore the labyrinth of theories about his true identity, the source of his seemingly boundless wealth, and the nature of his almost supernatural knowledge. This is a story that exists on the razor's edge between documented history and intoxicating myth, between the man as he was and the legend he so carefully constructed. So settle in as we open the doors to the Age of Enlightenment and meet the man who claimed to be immortal, the figure they called Der Wonderman, the Wonder Man, the one and only Count of Saint Germain. Before we chart the Count's mysterious course, we must first understand the world he so brilliantly navigated. The 18th century in Europe, particularly the period from the 1740s to the 1780s when Saint Germain was most active, was an age of profound and dizzying contradictions. It is known to history as the Age of Enlightenment, a time when reason, logic, and scientific inquiry were elevated as the highest virtues. It was the era of Voltaire, Diderot, and the encyclopedists in France, who sought to categorize all human knowledge and banish superstition from the world. It was the age of Isaac Newton's clockwork universe, a cosmos governed by predictable mathematical laws. It was a time when the old world of magic, mysticism, and divine right was beginning to crumble under the assault of rational thought. Yet, at the very same time, this rational age was shot through with a deep and persistent fascination with the irrational, the secret, and the occult. It was the golden age of secret societies. Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, and a host of other esoteric orders flourished, attracting members from every level of society, including kings, princes, and the very same Enlightenment philosophers who publicly championed reason. Alchemy was not yet entirely discredited as a science. Many intelligent people still believed in the possibility of transmuting metals and achieving immortality. The new science of mesmerism, a form of hypnotism, was taking the courts of Europe by storm, suggesting that invisible magnetic fluids connected all living things. It was a world caught between the past and the future. A world where a man could discuss Newtonian physics in the afternoon and attend a secret Rosicrucian meeting in the evening without any sense of contradiction. It was into this fertile paradoxical ground that the seed of the Saint Germain legend fell. Our story begins, as it must, with an arrival. Sometime around the year 1743, a new and intensely fascinating figure appeared in the high society of Paris. This was not an easy world to break into. The court of King Louis XV was the epicenter of European culture, a glittering hothouse environment of immense wealth, rigid etiquette, and deadly political intrigue. It was governed by gossip, reputation, and the favor of the king and his powerful official mistress, Madame de Pompadour. Into this sophisticated, cynical, and deeply hierarchical world stepped a man calling himself the Count of Saint Germain. No one knew where he came from. The title, Count of Saint Germain, seemed to be self-bestowed, though he never made a great show of it. Simply was his name. His origins were a complete and total mystery, a blank slate that invited speculation. When asked about his background, he would offer vague, romantic, and often contradictory answers, smiling enigmatically. Was he the son of a prince? A tax collector from Alsace? A Portuguese Jew? All were rumored, none were confirmed. His linguistic abilities only deepened the mystery. He spoke French, German, English, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese with such flawless, native-like fluency, adopting the local accent and idiom perfectly, that no one could ever pinpoint his country of birth. He also possessed a deep, scholarly knowledge of Russian, Chinese, Arabic, and ancient languages like Sanskrit, Chaldean, and Aramaic. He was a man of all nations and therefore of no nation. His physical appearance was as striking as his intellect. He was consistently described as being of medium height, well-built and athletic in his posture, with fine regular features, captivating dark eyes that seemed to hold a deep and ancient wisdom, and a charming, almost magnetic smile. He dressed with an exquisite, if somewhat sober, elegance. He favored simple, dark coats of the finest cut, but his shirts, his lace, and his accoutrements were always of the highest quality. And on his fingers, and often used as buttons or shoe buckles, he wore diamonds of a size and brilliance that stunned even the jaded Parisian aristocracy. The value of his jewels alone was estimated to be a fortune. He quickly became the most talked about man in the city. His talents were almost supernatural in their breadth and depth. He was a composer and a virtuoso musician. Horace Walpole, the English writer, heard him perform in London and wrote with astonishment of his skill, noting that he could play the violin and sing with incredible talent. He would often improvise complex pieces on the harpsichord or violin, and he was credited with inventing a new type of violin, the violino di gamba. He was a painter of startling ability, a fact attested to by Madame de Pompadour herself. He seemed to have rediscovered lost techniques of the old masters, using unique, brilliant pigments and oils of his own creation that seemed to give his canvases an inner, jewel-like luminescence. His paintings of landscapes and still lives were said to have a depth and vibrancy that no other artist of the time could replicate. He was also a raconteur of the highest order, a master of conversation in an age that prized it above almost all other social skills. His knowledge of history was encyclopedic, stretching from the ancient world to the most current political gossip. But he spoke of the past with a strange and unnerving intimacy, a casual familiarity that left his listeners spellbound and deeply unsettled. He would not say, "Historians believe that during the Council of Nicaea." He would say, "I recall a rather amusing argument I had with Augustine on that very point." He would describe the court of the Babylonian kings, the private life of Cleopatra, or the customs of the apostles with the vivid, first-hand detail of an eyewitness. When his astonished listeners would press him on these incredible claims, he would simply smile his enigmatic smile and artfully change the subject, leaving them to wonder. But it was his profound and demonstrable knowledge of chemistry and alchemy that truly set him apart and cemented his legendary status. He seemed to possess secrets of applied science that defied the understanding of his day. In a world where chemistry was still in its infancy, he operated like a scientist from the future. He would casually demonstrate for the king and his inner circle his ability to remove flaws from diamonds and other precious stones. He would take a cloudy, imperfect gem and through a process he never revealed, return it a short time later perfectly clear, seemingly larger and more brilliant. He even claimed to be able to fuse several small diamonds into one large, flawless stone, a feat that remains impossible to this day. He produced industrial dyes of unparalleled quality and permanence, colors so rich and stable that the king considered establishing a factory with him. He created luxurious cosmetics, creams, and lotions that were eagerly sought after by the ladies of the court, who swore they had a rejuvenating effect. And he hinted, always hinted, at possessing the two ultimate secrets of the alchemists: the philosopher's stone, the agent of transmutation that could turn base metals into pure gold, and the elixir of life, a potion that could cure any disease and, most tantalizingly, halt the aging process and grant a vastly extended lifespan. This last, incredible claim was subtly supported by his own curious and highly disciplined personal habits. He was a frequent and welcome guest at the most lavish dinners in Paris, but he was never once seen to eat food in public. He would sit for hours at the dining table, delighting the other guests with his wit and his stories, but would politely refuse all dishes, partaking only of water or, on occasion, a specially prepared oatmeal gruel that he brought himself. He claimed that his secret diet, and perhaps his elixir, was all he needed to sustain himself. This public fasting only added to his mystique, making him seem ethereal, otherworldly, not bound by the same base physical needs as ordinary mortals. The high society of Paris, and indeed the King of France himself, were utterly captivated. Who was this man? Was he royalty in exile? A sorcerer? A genius of unparalleled scope? The great philosopher Voltaire, one of the most brilliant and deeply skeptical minds of the age, was fascinated by him. In a letter to King Frederick the Great of Prussia, Voltaire wrote of Saint Germain with a mixture of admiration and wry puzzlement, calling him a man who knows everything and who never dies. The King of France, Louis XV, was more than just intrigued. He was a believer. The king was a deeply curious man, fascinated by science and the occult. He granted the count a suite of apartments in the magnificent royal Château de Chambord, and more importantly, provided him with a fully equipped, state-of-the-art laboratory where he could conduct his alchemical and chemical experiments in private. The king and his powerful official mistress, the highly intelligent Madame de Pompadour, would spend hours closeted with Saint Germain, listening to his historical reminiscences, questioning him on matters of state, and watching his alchemical demonstrations. He became a trusted, if unofficial, advisor to the monarch. But this kind of high-level access and mysterious influence inevitably breeds jealousy and creates powerful enemies. The Duc de Choiseul, the king's pragmatic and ambitious foreign minister, saw Saint Germain as a dangerous rival, a charlatan who had bewitched the king and was meddling in affairs of state. Choiseul despised the count's influence and sought to destroy him. In 1760, he engineered a cruel but clever plot to discredit him. He found a Parisian comedian, a known drunkard and mischief-maker named Gove, who bore a passing resemblance to the count. Choiseul paid this man to go around the salons of Paris, ridiculously dressed, claiming to be the Count of Saint Germain and telling the most absurd stories imaginable, including that he had personally advised Jesus Christ and had taught him how to walk on water. The plot worked brilliantly. The sophisticated but fickle Parisian society, always ready for a new joke, began to laugh at Saint Germain. He became an object of ridicule. The Count, a man who valued his dignity and mystique above all else, understood immediately that his position at the French court had become untenable. Sensing the dangerous shift in the political winds, he quietly and gracefully vanished from Paris as mysteriously as he had first arrived. This would become the repeating pattern of his life for the next quarter of a century. He would appear in a major European capital, dazzle the court with his talents and his enigmatic persona for a period of years, often involving himself in high-level, secret diplomacy, and then when his position became too public or too dangerous, he would vanish only to reappear a few years later somewhere else, always looking exactly the same, a handsome, vigorous man in his mid-40s. From Paris he traveled to England. His arrival in London did not go unnoticed. He was quickly arrested on suspicion of being a French spy, a common enough occurrence during the tense political climate of the 7 Years' War. But he was just as quickly released. The authorities could find no evidence against him, and it is likely that his powerful connections in France quietly intervened on his behalf. During his time in London, he impressed many with his musical compositions, which were published and performed to acclaim. He then surfaced in the most dramatic and consequential way in St. Petersburg, Russia, in 1762. He arrived at a pivotal moment in Russian history. The unstable and unpopular Tsar Peter III was on the throne, but a powerful conspiracy was brewing to replace him with his intelligent and ambitious German wife, Catherine. The Count of Saint Germain, known in Russia under the guise of a General Soltykov, became a close associate and advisor to the Orlov brothers, Grigory and Alexei, who were Catherine's lovers and the key military leaders of the coup. While the Count's exact role remained shrouded in secrecy, contemporary accounts place him at the very center of the conspiracy. He is said to have provided strategic advice and, crucially, a large sum of money to help finance the revolt. When the coup succeeded and Catherine the Great took the throne, Saint Germain was reportedly offered a high-ranking position in her new government, which he, in his typical fashion, politely declined before once again disappearing from the scene. After his Russian adventure, he spent several years traveling through the myriad principalities of Germany, a region teeming with esoteric societies and princely patrons fascinated by the occult. Here, he often called himself Graf Zerigi, or Well Done. He became a deeply respected figure in the worlds of Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, and the Knights Templar, who saw him as a great adept, a true possessor of ancient wisdom. He established factories for producing his unique dyes and fabrics, and set up alchemical laboratories under the patronage of various German nobles. He always seemed to have access to vast, unexplained sums of money, funding these enterprises himself and living a life of independent wealth. During all these years of travel and reinvention, from his first appearance in the 1740s to his final years in the 1780s, something truly remarkable was being observed by those who had the opportunity to encounter him repeatedly over long periods. He did not appear to age. The Countess von Georgi, an elderly noblewoman, recalled in her memoirs meeting the Count in Venice in the 1770s. She was shocked and bewildered to realize that he looked exactly the same, not a day older, as he had when she had met him at her husband's embassy in Paris over 40 years earlier. When she questioned him about this impossibility, he simply replied, with his characteristic charm, that he was indeed very old. Another famous anecdote tells of an elderly servant of the long-dead Madame de Pompadour who, upon seeing the Count decades after her mistress's death, remembered him from her youth at Versailles. She asked him if it was his father she had known all those years ago. "No, mademoiselle," he is said to have replied with a gentle smile, "but I myself was living in Paris in those days and had the honor of your acquaintance. I have simply forgotten to grow old." This apparent agelessness is the absolute core of the Saint Germain enigma. It is the element that elevates him from the category of a mere adventurer or a brilliant con man into a figure of genuine legend. It is the mystery that fuels the most fantastic theory of all, that he was a true immortal. The last well-documented phase of his life took place in the 1780s in the German province of Schleswig-Holstein, under the patronage and close friendship of Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel. The prince was a deeply serious student of the esoteric sciences, a dedicated Freemason and alchemist. He saw in Saint Germain not a charlatan, but a genuine master. The Count, now in his 70s or 80s if he were a normal man, but still appearing to be in his 40s, lived and worked with the prince in his castle at Eckernford. Together, they conducted alchemical experiments, attempting to perfect metals and create new dyes and fabrics. The prince wrote extensively of his time with the Count, describing him as one of the greatest philosophers he had ever known. It was here, in the prince's castle, that the Count of Saint Germain reportedly died. The date is generally given as February 27, 1784. His death was officially recorded in the local church registry. Prince Charles, his friend and patron, mourned him deeply and oversaw his burial. For any normal man, this would be the definitive end of the story. A birth, a life, a death. But for the Count of Saint Germain, his officially recorded death was merely an inconvenience to his legend. It was, in fact, just the beginning of his new life as a mythological figure. Because soon after his supposed demise, the sightings began. And they would continue for more than a century. In 1785, just 1 year after his supposed death, he was reportedly seen in Paris in the company of the famous hypnotist Anton Mesmer at a major conference of Freemasons and occultists. After the French Revolution began in 1789, several prominent aristocrats who had fled the Terror claimed to have had long and detailed conversations with the Count. The Comtesse d'Adhemer, a former lady-in-waiting to the executed Queen Marie Antoinette, wrote a detailed, if perhaps embellished, set of memoirs in which she claimed that Saint Germain had appeared to her on multiple occasions, both before and after his supposed death. He allegedly warned her in precise detail of the coming revolution, the rise of Napoleon, and the fate of the royal family, appearing and disappearing mysteriously, always looking the same, always ageless. The sightings continued throughout the 19th century, with the Count's legend growing with each passing decade. He became a key figure in the burgeoning spiritualist and occult movements. Prominent figures in the Theosophical Society, such as the enigmatic Helena Blavatsky and her successor Annie Besant, claimed that Saint Germain was not dead at all. They taught that he was an ascended master, an enlightened spiritual being who had transcended the cycle of physical death and rebirth. They believed he was part of a great white brotherhood of immortals who continued to secretly guide the spiritual destiny of humanity from a hidden retreat in the Himalayas. For the Theosophists, Saint Germain was not just a historical figure. He was a living spiritual teacher. This belief was carried into the 20th century. In the 1930s, an American named Guy Ballard founded a popular religious movement called the I Am activity. Ballard claimed that he had personally met the Count of Saint Germain on the slopes of Mount Shasta in Northern California. He said that Saint Germain, a radiant and immortal being, had revealed to him a new set of divine teachings, which became the basis for his religion. To this day, in certain New Age and esoteric circles, The Count of Saint Germain is revered as a powerful, living spiritual guide. The man had fully transformed into a myth. He had become a recurring character in the grand, unfolding narrative of Western esotericism, a symbol of ultimate human potential. So how do we, from our modern skeptical vantage point, untangle this incredible knot of history, legend, and belief? How do we separate the verifiable man from the mythological immortal? Let's go back to the historical record and try to answer the key questions. Who was he really? And what was the true source of his incredible abilities and his apparent physics-defying agelessness? Let's explore the main theories in depth. The first, the most rational, and the most straightforward theory is that the Count of Saint Germain was, quite simply, the most accomplished, the most intelligent, and the most brilliantly successful charlatan in human history. In this view, he was not immortal, but a master of deception and self-promotion on a scale that is almost difficult to comprehend. His vast knowledge was not supernatural. It was the result of a lifetime of obsessive, genius-level study and relentless travel. His linguistic skills, while truly remarkable, are not impossible for a gifted polyglot. His musical and artistic talents were genuine, the clear marks of a man of profound innate ability. His alchemical miracles, like removing the flaws from diamonds, were likely clever tricks of the trade. The ability to make a gem appear more brilliant or to fill in a crack could have been accomplished with clever uses of foil backing, colorless resins, or simple but dazzling sleight of hand performed for an audience that was eager to believe. His seemingly endless wealth, a key part of his mystique, could have come from a variety of very worldly sources. He was clearly a successful inventor, and he likely sold his unique dyes, cosmetics, and other chemical creations for exorbitant prices. He was a trusted advisor to kings and princes, and was almost certainly rewarded handsomely for his services, both diplomatic and personal. He was a known associate of wealthy financiers and bankers across Europe. It is also highly likely that he was, at various times, a highly paid spy, selling political and military intelligence to the highest bidder. There was no need for a philosopher's stone. A combination of genius, patronage, and espionage would suffice. And what of his most incredible claim, his apparent immortality? The skeptic would argue that this was his greatest and most carefully constructed illusion. The fact that he was never seen to eat in public was a brilliant piece of psychological theater, a simple but highly effective trick designed to set him apart and enhance his mystique. His incredibly detailed historical anecdotes could have been gleaned from a lifetime spent devouring obscure memoirs, court diaries, and forgotten histories, all presented with the unshakable confidence of a master storyteller and actor. His apparent lack of aging is the trickiest part of the puzzle for the skeptic to explain, but it is not insurmountable. It was likely a combination of several factors. He may have simply been blessed with remarkable genetics, a man who naturally aged well. He was known to be a man of temperate and disciplined habits, avoiding excess, which would have helped preserve his health and appearance. He was a master chemist, and it is highly probable that he created his own advanced cosmetics, skin creams, and perhaps even hair dyes that were far superior to anything else available at the time. But most importantly, we must remember the context. The 18th century was not our world of high-definition photography, video, and digital records. Eyewitness accounts, especially those recalled decades later by elderly people, are notoriously unreliable. The legend of his agelessness was likely a classic case of narrative inflation. Each time the story was told, it got better, more dramatic, more impossible. A man who looked well for his age became a man who didn't age at all. In this view, Saint Germain was a man of pure genius who consciously created a persona for himself, a role he played so perfectly and for so long that he convinced the world, and perhaps at times even himself, that he was more than human. His greatest creation was not a flawless diamond or a vibrant pigment, but the immortal, intoxicating myth of the Count of Saint Germain. But this theory, while rational and well argued, feels too mundane, too reductive, to fully explain such an extraordinary figure. This leads us to the second set of theories, the ones that suggest he was, in fact, royalty, and that his title was not self-bestowed, but real, though his true identity had to be concealed for political reasons. There are several candidates for his royal parentage. One of the most popular theories, prevalent during his lifetime, was that he was the illegitimate son of Maria Anna of Neuburg, the widow of the impotent King Charles II of Spain. Another, more compelling and historically plausible theory, suggests that he was the secret, unacknowledged son of Francis II Rákóczi, the Prince of Transylvania. Rákóczi had led a famous, but ultimately failed, rebellion for Hungarian independence against the Austrian Habsburgs. After his defeat, he was exiled and his children were taken from him and raised by the Austrian court under new names. The theory posits that one of these sons, perhaps the youngest, was spirited away and raised in secret by the powerful Medici family in Florence. If Germain was indeed the lost son of a deposed and exiled prince, it would explain a great deal. It would explain his noble bearing, his excellent and wide-ranging education, his fluency in multiple languages, and his natural ease in the courts of Europe. It would explain his need for a pseudonym and his reluctance to speak of his origins. It would also give him a powerful motive to be involved in the complex, high-stakes world of European diplomacy, perhaps constantly scheming and maneuvering to regain his lost title and inheritance. His name, Saint Germain, could be a coded reference, meaning holy brother, from the Latin Sanctus Germanus. This theory provides a plausible, if unproven, origin story for the man. It explains his status and his actions, but it does not, of course, explain his supposed immortality or his seemingly magical alchemical knowledge. This brings us, inevitably, to the third and most fantastic category of theories. These are the theories that take the Count at his word, or at least at his carefully crafted hint. These are the esoteric theories that suggest he was, in fact, something more than human, an adept who had mastered the hidden laws of nature. The central pillar of this worldview is the ancient and mysterious discipline of alchemy. We often think of alchemy today as a foolish and greedy pseudoscience, a chemically illiterate attempt to turn lead into gold. But for its true practitioners, from the ancient Egyptians to the Renaissance masters, it was something far more profound. It was a spiritual philosophy, a royal art. The transmutation of a base metal like lead into a perfect metal like gold was merely an earthly, physical metaphor for the real purpose of the great work. The transmutation of the imperfect, mortal human soul into a state of spiritual enlightenment, perfection, and immortality. The ultimate goal of this great work was the creation of two legendary miraculous substances. The first was the philosopher's stone, a crystalline or stone-like substance that could not only perfect metals, but could also perfect life itself, curing all disease. The second was the elixir of life, a liquid believed to be derived from the philosopher's stone, which, when consumed, could grant a vastly extended lifespan, or even true, unending physical immortality. In this esoteric view, the Count of Saint Germain was a true adept, a master alchemist who had successfully and secretly completed the great work. He had created and partaken of the elixir of life. This single, extraordinary claim, if true, would explain everything about him. His lack of aging was not a trick. It was the literal physical result of the elixir. His vast and seemingly inexhaustible wealth came not from patrons or espionage, but from his ability to transmute base metals into pure gold at will. His incredible knowledge of history and science was not just from study, but from the simple fact of having lived through the centuries he so vividly described. His refusal to eat was because his perfected, etherealized body no longer required coarse, ordinary food for sustenance. For believers in this theory, the Count was not a charlatan, but a living testament to the hidden divine potential of human consciousness. He was a member of a secret brotherhood of immortals, a master who occasionally stepped out of the shadows and into the stream of history to gently guide humanity, to plant seeds of knowledge and progress, before retreating once again into his timeless, anonymous existence. For them, the sightings of him after his death are not legends. They are proof that he simply faked his demise to escape the growing scrutiny of a more modern, more skeptical world, freeing himself to continue his timeless existence elsewhere. So where does this leave us, the modern observer, faced with such a stark and compelling choice of narratives? Do we believe the rational, skeptical explanation that he was a brilliant, once-in-a-generation con man? Or do we dare to embrace the esoteric, mystical explanation that he was a true immortal, a master of alchemy? Perhaps the most intellectually satisfying answer lies not in choosing one extreme, but in finding a synthesis somewhere in the middle. It is entirely possible, and perhaps probable, that the Count of Saint Germain was a man of genuine, extraordinary, and perhaps unprecedented genius. A man whose natural talents in science, art, and diplomacy were so profound that they seemed supernatural to the people of his time. He may well have made genuine breakthroughs in chemistry, creating dyes, alloys, cosmetics, and perhaps even medical remedies that were decades or even centuries ahead of his era. He may have discovered dietary, meditative, or lifestyle practices that allowed him to maintain his health and youthful appearance to a degree that was simply unheard of in the 18th century. He was, without a doubt, a man who understood the immense power of mystery. He cultivated his enigmatic persona with the skill of a master dramatist. He never, by any credible account, explicitly and crudely claimed, "I am immortal." Instead, he allowed and even subtly encouraged others to come to that conclusion themselves. He wrapped himself in a cloak of legend, and in doing so he made himself unforgettable. The Count of Saint Germain is, in the end, a historical Rorschach test. What you see in him says as much about your own worldview as it does about him. The hardened skeptic sees a brilliant charlatan. The romantic sees a lost prince, a tragic hero. The mystic sees an enlightened, ascended master. He is a mirror, reflecting our own beliefs about the limits of human potential, the nature of reality, and the possibility of magic in a mundane world. He remains one of history's most compelling and seductive figures precisely because he cannot be easily categorized or pinned down. He was a man who lived at the very dawn of the Age of Reason, yet he seemed to embody all the deep, alluring mysteries of the age of magic that was passing away. He was a scientist who practiced alchemy, a diplomat who consorted with mystics, a man of the world who seemed to be not of this world at all. The ultimate truth of his origin, his name, and the nature of his astonishing abilities may be lost to time, forever shrouded in the mists and powders of his 18th-century laboratory. But his story, his legend, endures. It is a powerful and timeless testament to the enduring human fascination with the idea of transcending our own limitations, of cheating death, of achieving a state of perfection. Whether he was a man or a myth, or some extraordinary and inexplicable combination of the two, the Count of Saint Germain achieved a form of immortality after all. He lives on not in the flesh, but in the story, a timeless historical enigma, forever young, forever mysterious, and forever just beyond our grasp. Thank you for joining us on this deep and extensive journey into the life and legend of the enigmatic Count of Saint Germain. His story is a captivating and unique blend of documented history, alchemical legend, and pure unsolved mystery. If you have been fascinated by this exploration of a potential immortal and one of history's greatest enigmas, please consider showing your support by liking this audio, subscribing to our channel, and clicking that notification bell. It ensures you won't miss our next adventure into the unexplained and forgotten corners of the past. Now we hand the final inquiry over to you. Having heard the detailed evidence, the context, and the competing theories, what is your personal conclusion on the Count of Saint Germain? Do you believe he was the ultimate con man, a master of illusion and psychological manipulation? Do you think the theory of exiled royalty holds the most water? Or do you believe it is possible, however remotely, that he had truly unlocked some profound secret of life and longevity, a secret that science has yet to rediscover? We would love to read your own conclusions, your reasoning, and your theories in the comments section below. The life of the Count of Saint Germain serves as a powerful reminder that history is not always a settled and dusty matter of dates and facts. Sometimes it presents us with figures who defy easy explanation, individuals who seem to have stepped directly out of the pages of a fable. He forces us to ask, what do we truly know and what do we choose to believe? Until next time, sleep well.